Hello fellow humans and welcome to this video, and today I want to talk about the most endangered species in the entirety of WoT Blitz, and that is the Tier 8 Tech Tree Medium Tank. Now, because these tanks have on an average about 45% win rate, so they're basically the worst performing tanks in the entire game. Now, some of them did get adjustments, like the Pershing, like the Centurion, so in this video, let's find out if those adjustments were worth it, and what tanks do need further adjustments as well. So let's start off with a Pershing right here because, you know, it works very well. Now, obviously, the disclaimer, if you're a good player, you can make these things work. Duh. I can do 3,000 average damage in these. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, the Pershing is quite an interesting tank. Now, it still has only 180 penetration on the AP, but it has almost 2,700 DPM. I wouldn't use calibrated on this thing because you have APCR, so... And the APCR penetration is already very high. You have 270 or something like that, which is good enough for a Tier 8 medium. Well, almost, because obviously if you're up against Tier 9 heavies, you might run into some problems there, and that is also the main problem with these vehicles. Heavy tank. But a heavy tank is easier to play because it has better armor, higher alpha damage, sometimes even higher DPM and higher penetration, and also, most of the time, a lot more hit points. It becomes quite obvious why these tanks are performing this bad. Now, what isn't obvious though is why it's only the Tier 8s. But we can find that out. A Tier 9 medium tank tends to have somewhat of a Tier 10 gun, like a Ciara, like a Leopard. They all have basically a run-down version of a Tier 10 gun with good penetration. These things don't have that. Some Tier 8 heavy tanks start at 230mm of AP penetration, for example. This thing has 180 on the AP. Now, while it does have good APCR rounds, something like the Panther II has 237mm of APCR penetration, which means it can't compete at all in that regard. So, you're kind of beginning to see the problem there, right? Also, the STA-1, for example, has 2,100 DPM, which is worse than a lot of Tier 8 heavy tanks. So, you end up at a point where these vehicles are just overall worse, except for the mobility, and that's the only thing they have. And to use mobility, you need one thing, and that is game knowledge. You need to know exactly where you are, what you're doing, everything that is happening around you, and most people don't have that because they either don't care or they're not good enough at the game yet. So, when you have a disadvantage in everything, and an advantage in that one thing that you need to be good at, you start to see why these sort of lack down a bit. Now, the problem is, with a Pershing, that is still, even though it now has 2,600 DPM, it's still not that competitive against something like a E75TS. Now, obviously, you're not supposed to brawl with those. That's a given. But most of the people do. And sometimes, because Blitz is very confined game, it does, sometimes you have to just do it. And in that situation, you're completely and utterly screwed. Because, for example, I have 225 alpha damage. That E75TS has 310. The IS-2 has even 400. So, not only do I have worse hit points, worse armor, worse penetration, worse TPM, I also have worse alpha damage. So, you kind of start to see why these tanks are performing like shit, right? Yeah. Now, obviously, how do you change that? How do you make it better? It's a good question because who knows? Because the problem is with that is if you buff a medium tank to a point where it is strong and playable for bad players, you'll almost tend to make it overpowered for a good player, like a Leopard 1, for example. A noob or a bad player is still not gonna get anything done in that vehicle, but a strong player is gonna easily do 3,000 average damage without even caring. God damn it, IS-2. Why do you have to do team play? But now I can't kill them. Now, the thing is, you have, for example, rate of fire advantage with this vehicle. With 2,600 DPM, you have that advantage, which means you can't keep a E75TS permanently tracked, for example, which is a great thing to do. And you also have the mobility advantage, which means you can circle around people just like that. But that, in alone, is not enough, because to use those tactics, you gotta know what you're doing. So, the Pershing, I think, at now, the way it is now, is fine. What I might consider doing to it is buff the AP penetration to about 195, and just to give it a bit more opportunity there as well. Because, I mean, some people don't even know what APCR is, so... But anyway, you can't help those. That's the point. You can't improve the players. That's the problem, really. But you can make the tanks more playable and more competitive. I mean, the P-44 Panther is a great example. It works. It's a tier 8 medium tank. Also, the Chimera. This is also a tier 8 medium tank. It works. It is a great tank. That's 2,700 damage in the Pershing right there. Just like that. So, they can definitely work. But they need to be played well. They have to know a player that is good at it. And for example, I can show you right here, my Panther II, that wasn't the case, because this Panther II, this was my first tier 8 in the game in 2014. So, yeah, I was pretty bad back then, as you can see. So everyone starts off bad. And obviously, some also stay bad for a very long time, but let's not hope that. To get good at these kind of tanks, there isn't really much you can do, because obviously, as I already said, the heavies are better at everything. So you need to be a massively better player to even break even with these vehicles, which is just not very nice. Now, the Panther is one of those that definitely needs some love. Now, obviously, another thing is, I'm playing these tanks fully upgraded, right? That Panther, for example, is stock. You have to play stock tanks. You have to play stock crews, for example. So that makes these disadvantages even worse if you're playing against a tier 8 premium heavy tank with full crew and full equipment. But I'll make a video on that at another time as well. How pay to win the game has actually gotten these days. Now, if you take that into account as well, with the stock tanks and all that, and the stock crews, you end up where a tank is significantly worse than, for example, a T-34 right there. So, I hope that IS-3 doesn't yeet himself away. He did yeet himself away, which is obviously not very nice, but that's the heavy tank players these days. And that's a big problem, because what you want to do in a tank like this is you want to have competent heavies, because you yourself can't really tank the armor tank shots that well, because you don't have that much armor. Like a T-69, for example. It also has horrible AP penetration and horrible armor, but it at least has an autoloader, so it works somewhat. This thing does not do that. You have to peak a lot of times. You have to peak a lot more than you have to do in a heavy tank. And you're also a lot more vulnerable while you peak, because, obviously, you have less alpha damage, which means you have to peak more, which means you're going to lose quite a long time. Oh, low roll. And he ran himself to death. Nice. And that's the biggest problem. What I would do with the Panther, certainly, I would buff the upper front armor to make it, to put it a bit more in line with the E50 and the E50M. You know, to make this a line of armored medium tanks. Because it is already quite good, the armor on this thing. So you can't make it a lot better. What I would do to this vehicle as well is buff the APCR penetration, because it's only 237, which is, you might as well not have premium rounds, basically. Which is not very nice at all. So that's what I would do to this thing. Then, the STA-1. It has heat. It's very good at that. But it has abysmal DPM, and it could be a bit faster. The Indian Panzer, same, pretty much. I wouldn't do much to it, except make the gun a lot better, because the Leopard PTA has a wonderful gun. The Leopard 1 has a wonderful gun. The Indian Panzer has a trash gun. So, make it better. I'm gonna die here, probably. Or not. There we go. He did miss. Panther take 5 come. I have no idea what that means, but sure. Same with those. They do need some love. The Pershing, the Centurion, already gotten it. If that was enough, remains to be seen with how their performance is going to develop. There's a hole in here. I don't like that. And he's low enough to shoot through there. So, yeah. Gonna have to watch out for this. Yeah, Panther definitely needs some love. The STA-1 needs some love. I mean, the Panther works, you know, there's always worked since they introduced it, so why couldn't they do that to the others as well? You know, so just make them better. Make them more capable. Obviously, you're never gonna make them, get them to a point where they're gonna be as easy to play as a heavy tank, but you can at least make them as usable as a tier 8 heavy tank. So, with that said, if you can, do everything in your power to grind these tanks. Lol, I got 6 kills. Didn't even notice. Do everything you can to grind these in special modes, because in random battles you're screwed. And hope that the Panther II, the STA-1, the Indian Panzer, also the T-44, and I don't know, maybe also the T-34-2 get some love, because that would be very nice to have. And with that said, thank you very much for watching. See you in the next one. Goodbye.